there's just an overwhelming amount of evidence that says that this is a real thing.
It was another kind of like crack in my reality.
I want to know if the government's still doing this.
If that's true, what does that mean about the universe?
You know, it is real. Wake up.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very first edition of Debriefed, podcast. We're going to dive into basically you want to call it an investigation, of remote viewing, which we just had. We had over a year-long journey at this point.
Yep.
Took a little hiatus, but then we got back to it, and we just, you guys have probably seen, all the videos that we put up on this channel, and hopefully you've seen Nelson's videos as well on his channel, which looks at a different part of remote viewing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nelson Dellis.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me.
So let's just dive right into it, guys. If you don't mind, obviously subscribing, leaving a like, and maybe leaving a review on the audio platform. It really helps out. Nelson Dellis, 5-time U.S. memory champion. Let's start at the beginning. You were hit up on Facebook, I believe.
Yeah, so as part of this memory world, I'm a part of a few Facebook groups, where we just post about championships and happenings in the memory world, as exciting as you may think that may be. But anyways, people sometimes come out there and post really out there stuff, and sometimes you ignore it, sometimes you read it. And this particular post, it wasn't directed towards me specifically, it was just for the group. And it was maybe a sentence or two saying something like, I'd have to look it up exactly, but it was basically, there's a job opportunity, part-time, make a little cash, doing something with your memory. Right. That vague, not even talking about anything.
Did other people respond to that?
From what I saw, I didn't see any
other responses.
No, nobody had even commented on it. Maybe a couple likes.
So you don't know if anyone else was introduced to this, or you would have known by now, speaking to Brett?
Oh, I know who else was involved.
And there was others.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, did you hear about them?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And how did they
okay.
How did they do?
So
I didn't hear about this.
Yeah, so I don't know how much I want to give because I feel bad putting him into that world. But there is another well-known memory athlete there were two of us. It was me and this other person. I think maybe a couple other people went into the interview, if you can call it that. Applied or whatever, or threw their hat in the ring. But I think they'd already said, I probably was the first because I always answer to stuff like that. I'm just curious. And that's what I did. I sent an email saying, or a DM, and was interested, and they called me pretty quickly. And I think this other memory athlete was the second, and then they were good with two of us for this project. But this other memory athlete is a top memory athlete. I won't tell it who it is. But I will say that he is of a part of the world where they think a very certain way. And it's hard to break that.
Skeptic.
Yeah. And the most skeptic, if you can think of any country in the world where they might be that way and like nothing will change their...
So he's Middle Eastern.
No, I don't. Maybe I'm making the generalization.
There's a lot of skeptics in the world.
But it's funny. I was surprised that he had done this.
Uh-huh.
But, and we would check in from time to time going through this program and be like, what do you think? Is this real? Like, have you had any hits? And even Brett would say, like, he's doing really well.
Wow.
Like, probably even better than me. But the memory athlete would just be like, this is such bullshit. Brett's tricking me.
Right.
Our trainer, he's like switching out photos, or I'm making it up in my head. And I talked to him maybe like half a year ago, and he doesn't do it anymore, but he still thinks back on it. It was just like, it was a horse of crock shit.
Can't blame him for feeling that way.
Yeah.
It's how I would think more than half the people, feel about this subject because they're uneducated.
Yeah.
And, not to jump ahead, but going into the places and speaking to the people that we've spoken to, I feel just healthier that we come to our own conclusions through this rather than just dismiss it all entirely. And I feel like you're the same. So after this, you're doing this memory stuff for them. They train you every day for an hour for a month, 5 days a week, something like that.
Yeah, it was pretty rigorous. I mean, the actual session was an hour a day, 5 times a week, Monday through Friday, for about a month, a little more. And then we'd have to do these sessions. So there was homework, essentially, and that took some time. So it was pretty in depth. And then once that training session was over, we kind of graduated to doing the actual tasks for our employer.
Right. Okay. And then based on those, so to get a little technical, what you ended up doing with these people was something known as ARV, which is different than remote viewing and different than CRV, coordinate remote viewing. ARV is associative remote viewing, and if I understand correctly, it's a binary sort of system to where you're essentially describing something, and then you're presented with 2 pictures, and whatever one that is closer to will be the result. And on the back of that paper could be some information that you're not privy to, and that maybe even the person giving you the photos isn't privy to, but that goes into a whole separate thing. Yeah.
So basically you're doing a remote viewing session, a little more stripped down of a remote viewing session, only because you're going to take your results and have it judged, ideally by somebody else. But in some cases you can do it yourself if you have a good protocol. But you judge what your results match better to, photo A or photo B. And on the side of the person who provides those photos for you, they try to really choose photos that are really different, just so that the judging is easier and there's really no way that you could be confusing one or the other when it comes to what you saw. And then, that binary choice, those 2 photos on the side of the tasker, they basically associate one photo with the other, with some situation. And in our case, we were doing it with trading and stocks, right? So photo A might be a stock's going up versus photo B going down. We do the remote viewing session. I say photo A, right? And then they would make a bet or trade based on that.
Right.
And we were a team, so it was actually not just what Nelson got. It would have been what me and number 2 was, the other memory athlete, and then they actually had another group of 6
and I'm
people.
sure if like those that information was conflicting, they might just not use it. And then if it was supportive, if all the information that you were getting from these 3 sessions were supporting, then that would be like a conclusive way to bet.
Yeah. So sometimes, based on what you get as a group, you pass, right? You don't do anything. Even sometimes my judging or my session would be worthy of a pass because it wouldn't be very convincing whether it was one or the other.
Right.
And that's okay. And that's why having a team is so much more effective than just one person.
Right.
Let's say my stats say that I hit it right 55% of the time. As a group, you may have somebody that's closer to 60%, somebody that's like 53%. But as a group, you can get a better hit rate.
And I think that goes for a lot of what they were doing, at SRI back in the day as well. They had teams of remote viewing and would more often than not, have multiple people come to the same conclusions, which really strengthened their resolve in whatever mission they were on.
Yeah.
So this is something that you've done. You've since learning this. Now take us through. I don't want to get into the specifics of this because there is NDA involved and there is everything else. But this project ends. You're done with this. And you move on. You then started using this for your own benefit to see if you can win at horse racing and baseball games and sporting events and that type of thing. And how did that do for you?
Yeah, it's still ongoing. Let me back up a bit because I feel like people would love to know whether I actually made money from this. And the first project, yes, they paid me for my time. It was all right. It was good for what it was. And it had a cool story attached to it. In terms of when I started actually doing stuff for their portfolio, I was promised a back-end portion of the returns, but the project kind of fizzled out for some reasons I can't talk about, unrelated to the results or anything. It had to do with the people running it at the high levels. So anyways, I didn't see anything from that. Okay. So I let that sit for a while. I still wasn't 100% convinced, but I was kind of on this quest for myself to like, is this real or not? Figure that out. And I started doing stuff with casual day-to-day things that I go to. We have a horse racing track near our house, so try it with some horse racing. I like to watch the NBA Finals and March Madness, so try it on betting on some games and stuff like that. And then I try to keep track of the results.
Were you alone in this?
Yeah. Just so self-funded, not crazy money, just putting a little bit. I don't really like to gamble for sports, but and I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I'm not one of these guys that knows the odds of this and that. I don't understand it really. So I have to learn a bit of that. But I started with the horse racing. One day I went to the track in Saratoga, and they have about 10 races in a day. And each race, let's say, has about 10 horses, give or take average. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Some horses get scratched, whatever. And I was basically going to see, can I predict the winner of the race? Which isn't really a good way to bet on horse racing. You got to do the
whole spread,
trifecta, and the box this and that. I don't even
right, because the more things you bet on that are correct, the more risk is involved, but the more payout is there. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And so what I did, I kind of consulted with my former trainer, what would be the best approach. And he said, Brett, just try something simple, like try to view the color of the winner. Like
that's
every
interesting.
horse has a saddle color, right? It's depends on how many there are, but there's always like red, yellow, blue, green, exactly, orange. And if there's more horses, there's even more colors. Anyway, so I would do kind of like a mini session sometimes before the race, or I would just kind of be like, what color do I see? What comes to mind? The first thing I think of when I calm my mind, be like blue. Okay, so I bet on blue to be the winner. And that day I went 4 for 10, which is statistically very interesting.
Yeah, it's because this isn't. Is this a 50-50 thing?
No. So if you randomly guessed, say there's 10 horses, you would have a 1 in 10 chance of getting it right.
You would have a 1 in 10 chance, right?
Yeah.
Because it isn't a 50-50. There's 10 horses.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you got 4.
Yeah.
Wait, 4 races you guessed correctly?
Correct. Yeah.
That is incredible.
And actually, I don't know if this really means anything. Maybe the statisticians out there can tell me, but 9 out of the 10, I got a horse that placed.
So that's
1, 2, or 3.
Yeah. What is it? The p-value of that's got to be pretty high.
Yeah. My friend, the math on stats, I'm bad, but
I know that in remote viewing they've calculated p-value.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Where you there's this number against all the variables that determines whether or not this is 1 in a million or whatever it is, and that's something that they've seen with remote viewing time and time again, and the reason they continued funding it.
Yeah.
So you made money from that.
Yeah, that day. So I put $100 in my account. I think every race, I bet like $10 or $20, and I ended up ending the day with like $350. Because, and this is where I realized that my approach, while interesting, may be the reason why you don't really see any millionaire remote viewers, or maybe they are. They just don't talk about it. Is okay if I did that approach, and I'm seeing the winning horse. Most times, the winning horse is going to be the favored, right? Which is not a great bet, right? You're going to win.
Yeah, you won't win a lot.
You might win, but you won't win a lot.
So were the horses that you bet on, were they the favorites?
So 3 of them were the favorites.
And 3 of them that won were the favorites?
Exactly. And the 3 of the 4 that I won. And I won a little bit, maybe $20 or $15.
Yeah, you double your bet type thing.
Yeah. But then the 4th one was a
underdog.
A huge underdog. And that's where you make the money, right?
Yeah, that'll pay 10x or whatever.
Yeah. And that's where I think I won $200 on that one.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it was wild. The race, I have it on video. It's going to be in one of my videos, but that horse came from behind, and I was just like, I'm not going to win. It was a weird color too. It was the gray saddle, which that came to me. I was like, gray? Like, what position? It was a big race of like 13 horses, I think. And man, it came down the home stretch, like from the back to the front.
How are you feeling in this moment?
Dude, the reaction.
You understood why people go to horse races in that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that I saw that.
Yeah.
I remember we were eating Shake Shack. There's a Shake Shack at the track. And I was like, I'm going to do my session. I was like, Gray's coming to me. This is the one. And it was the one. And during the race, my wife was with me. She was like, oh, sorry, buddy. It's not going to happen. And then he came, and I was like, wow.
Was she also getting excited?
Yeah, we were. Yeah,
that's so
crazy.
Cool. So Brett Stewart, let's talk about the first person that we encounter in this journey. Brett Stewart, who claims to do this for a living.
Yes.
Which, anyone out there wondering whether or not remote viewing is accurate, if someone can make a living doing this, I mean, that should be. Now, it is to be argued that perhaps he's got side hustles and maybe he teaches remote viewing on the side and that gives him some money. And that's to be taken into account too. But from what he was telling me that he was getting like above 50%.
Yeah. I think in the 60s.
In the
actually.
60s, right. And again, the p-value of that, if anybody could control winning 60% of the time, you'd be a trillionaire.
Yeah.
Right? Because you could bet all your money all the time kind of thing, or half your money all the time, and eventually just win money. So he does this for a living, which I thought was really interesting. And so he's the one who's kind of guiding you in this betting process because this is his domain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He learned this from a guy named Major Ed Dames. Let's go down this road with Ed, good old Ed. Now, have you read his book?
Yeah.
So I have as well as audiobook. Very interesting, and I suggest you guys go listen to it. It's if you take it as fiction, it is a great piece, and if you take it as fact, it is a great piece. And that's kind of how I view it. Controversial figure.
Yeah.
In the remote viewing space, and there's a few reasons why. One is because if you've seen the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, which isn't a great reference for any of this, but it is a terrible movie, but it has its moments.
It's out there.
Yeah. Kevin Spacey, you had Jeff Bridges. No, not Jeff Bridges. Who is it?
Yeah.
Was it Jeff Bridges?
Jeff Bridges.
And George Clooney.
And Ewan
McGregor. And the Force and the Jedi and all those. They must have. The writers must have mentioned the Force and having Jedi powers like 100 times. They had fun with it. But he plays the role of Kevin Spacey. So Kevin Spacey plays the role of Ed Dames in all of this, and kind of quote unquote the asshole of the bunch, who is very a villain who wants to have remote viewing powers, but isn't the most gifted.
Yeah.
And who then takes control once it was passed on to the Army intelligence, who takes control of the program for a few years. It was only like 2 years, I believe, 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
And this is during, I think, the passing of Ingo Swann as well.
Yeah.
And so it is sort of bequeathed to Ed, and Ed sort of runs with this protocol, and then makes his own protocol based on Ingo's work. And that's where there was a rift between the other remote viewers, the scientists, and then Ed and his team. Because Ed made this sort of protocol, this military, you can teach it to anyone, and it's just about
stage
practice.
1, stage 2.
Exactly. All the things that we've learned, the things that we've done, which have worked.
Yep.
All right, we can't say they didn't work. They did work. We did get some incredible results.
Yep.
So there's that, and then we'll get into the other stuff later, which is where the scientists and Joe McMoneagle and Hal Puthoff and all of them, where they, how they see remote viewing. But let's talk about Ed for a second. Meeting Ed after reading the book, what were your first impressions?
Right. Well, so going into the meeting, first of all, anybody else that I've talked to about remote viewing, the people in that space, it started with Brett's counterpart who hired me, and some other people I've met kind of in the ESP sci world. Whenever I said Brett, they didn't. It's not that they didn't like Brett, but I think they knew it was associated with Ed. Yeah. And so there's always kind of like this stigma against Ed and his practices. Oh, kind of controversial. Everybody would say that. Everybody. Yeah. I'm like, okay, dang, I learned from the wrong person, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know what that means. Like in the memory world, there's some people that are like, yeah, that he's not, and it's like you don't really know the intricacies of what that means. Yeah. Why? So yeah, we sat down. I met him at the airport. He was the kindest man ever. Took us around town. Was so happy to meet us and talk to us. He claimed to be a hermit, so I could see how he was very excited to share with us. He doesn't get out very often. And get out and really, let us know everything
and share stories of his childhood and everything else. It was really pleasant.
Yeah. So nothing against the man. He was very pleasant. I enjoyed the day and a half that we spent with him and the dinners that we shared. But man, when we sat down to interview him and talk about the stories, I walked out of that and I was just like, I don't know about this anymore.
Yeah. It was bewildering.
It's
Again,
just out there.
Yeah, it was out there. And you guys can see that interview on Patreon, by the way. You know, I cut it short for the sake of the video, but if you have a look on Patreon, it's the full unedited version of Ed. And that, if watching that gives you an idea of the conversations we had afterwards as well, because it jumps from, you know, ultra terrestrials to Sasquatch to the ghost of dinosaurs, you know, all these fantastical things. And it's really hard for someone like us who's seeking, you know, part of me wants to believe this is real, right?
Same.
Initially. I get into this and I'm like, I'm hoping. So there is a bias. And although you would think hearing someone like Ed would strengthen that bias, it actually works contrary to it. And it makes it, I really, really like afterwards, after that particular encounter, I felt myself backing away a little bit in the other direction.
Yeah.
You had the same feeling.
Yeah.
And however, you know, there were some really interesting things that he'd brought up, and you know, talking about remote viewing aliens, which to me is, you know, endlessly fascinating because that's another thing I want to believe in.
Sure. Yeah.
But when it came to the practical remote viewing stuff, like he did a session in front of us, which again really got nowhere, because he's like, oh, this is where this guy is right now.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I could have said he's in a field of flowers, and there's no way of disproving that.
Right.
And a lot of what Ed was telling us, even the stories, there was no evidence. I'm not going to say proof, but there was no evidence. There was not a shred of evidence.
Feedback.
No
to
feedback.
whether he was right or wrong.
Exactly.
That bugged me. Yeah.
It bugged me very much. He had some cool stories, like I said, but you know, you just have to take his word for it. And memory is a tricky thing. It tends to not play in your favor when we're counting, you know, facts. So, you know, we go meet Ed. There's this whole thing happening. It was interesting because on that day, it was June 16th. There was also something going around on Twitter, which was the resonant frequency.
Oh, that's right.
Of the Earth was at 50.
Yeah.
As opposed to being around 7.8 and 15, somewhere around there. And no one knew what that meant. No one knew if that was a solar flare or if that was a malfunction in the equipment. But it was all the buzz on Twitter. Right. Did you feel differently that day?
I was just excited, but nothing out of the ordinary would have been like something's going on. It just felt like a cool, interesting day where we were.
Yeah. I felt more calm.
Okay.
And it was notable, like enough that I noted it even before I knew. I was like, I feel really good about, like, I feel like in a good, and then I heard that, it kind of like doubled down. I was like, oh, it's this, you know, my conspiracy mind took over.
Yeah. But yeah, with Ed, you know, the thing that, like I said, that bugged me was every session that he did and all the like things the stories he was telling us about remote viewing sessions he's done, projects he's working on, were all about things that you can never verify.
Yeah.
You know,
that bugged me.
Where, you know, something to do with aliens and,
sure, you
know, what happened a million years ago at this location. Like, okay, it's interesting. His theories for them or whatever he sees. And then how certain he was.
That was another red flag.
Much, right? There was no question he was wrong.
Yeah. And everyone else was wrong.
Right.
You know, and that to me is a red flag when, you know, you're the person who thinks the whole world is crazy and you're not crazy. You know, the likelihood is that it's the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's crazy, but I'm saying that the claims he was so certain of that he didn't leave a margin for error. And from what we found out afterwards, speaking to other people in the remote viewing, you know, space, was that there is a vast margin of error with remote viewing. Yeah. And that is notable. And scientists and physicists who study this will tell you it is not accurate.
Yeah.
It is not accurate, but it is also not to be dismissed.
Yep.
And that's kind of, you know, what led to the ongoing of the project.
Yeah.
So we wrap up this thing with Ed, which, by the way, I want to, you know, thank Ed again. It was, you know, really, it was fun to get both sides of remote viewing, to get these crazy different edges of the spectrum. And I think in the world of remote viewing, I think more people would do a story on Ed and then separately do a story on someone else. To have them both in the same video, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, though, when he did do his session, I remember feeling really inspired by it.
Same.
I watched it and doing his practice, and I was like, oh,
I did too.
This guy's really in it. Like, I want to do a session. Like, I want to be like this. In the end, he said that if he wanted to do a full session, it would have taken
45 minutes
or longer, the detail that he goes to. I remember we walked out for a break, and I was like, wow, that's, it was really cool to watch him do that.
Yep.
But then, it didn't go anywhere, so I was kind of let down a little bit. But it looked like he was
channeling something.
It also gave me a vibe of when I was in Nepal interviewing this guy that claimed to be a natural memory guy.
Oh, the speed reader guy.
Speed reader, he could memorize a page just by blah, 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 and he'd read it, right? And I interviewed him, he did a demo, and I left feeling so perplexed and sort of inspired and not sure what to think. And it felt like that, and it, not to say that Ed is a con man, but it felt, I had that, like, he confused me, he tricked me, maybe, or there's a little bit of pizzazz there that I don't know.
The difference is there's what Ed's saying, there's no way of verifying it, right? And so it does let you linger in that space a little longer. Yeah. And I remember actually during the session at one point, he was smelling something. You kind of see him on camera and he's like disgusted by what he's smelling. And before that happened, when he's picking up the smells, even before he was disgusted, I remember thinking to myself, pungent. I kept getting pungent. And then he said pungent.
Yes.
And I was like, I literally, like, my heart skipped a beat because I was like, this is what I was picking up. And I feel like and I mentioned it to him, he's like, oh, that's a normal thing. It happens all the time that people get, the same feelings. And hey, maybe he's right.
Yeah.
I think he might be onto something.
I forgot that part, because I was over his shoulder filming, and I remember like a millisecond before he would write something down, I almost felt what he was going to write down. It was a really weird feeling. Yep.
So, we end our time with Ed. Ed, I get the feeling Ed, thinks this whole documentary is going to be about him, which maybe I didn't make it clear in the beginning, and that was my fault. That but I did tell him that we were going to be visiting other people. But Ed wanted to get really deep into what it is he does, and if you guys want to check out what Ed does, because I do think it's interesting and I do think it merits more investigation, because obviously he trained Brett, and Brett does this for a living, and Ed claims he's got the best students in the country. Yeah. And, we learned from them, and then we're seeing results. We're newbies to this.
Listen,
so there is something there.
And he was a part of these projects.
He was part of
that's
SRI.
Not a lie. That's real. So why would he be there if there wasn't something to what he's able to do,
Correct. Yeah, he was read in. The other thing is, like, he told me about the billet structure, that he was read in. There were 100 people read into this project only, which means that as soon as someone leaves the project or retires or whatever, they bring one more person in, and that number caps at 100. And so very highly, highly classified. I can't stress this enough. This was one of the most top secret projects ever in the United States government that we know about. This is one of the top, because you don't get top secret to that level and hear about it normally. So, one of the more notable unclassified projects ever in existence. So we enter a time with Ed, and during this time, I was reaching out. I've reached out to Hal Puthoff. I've reached out to McMonagle. We reached out to Pat Price, was it, or Paul Smith?
Oh, Paul Smith.
Lynn Buchanan. Right. Yep. So all these we've reached out. I wanted to get as much information as I could. Now this brings us. We finished with Ed. Let's talk about Joe McMonagle. We reached out to him online. Nancy McMonagle, Scooter, responds, and she's super bubbly, lovely, full of energy. She happens to be Bob Monroe's stepdaughter of the Monroe Institute, and was director of the Monroe Institute several times, I believe. Bob Monroe, who wrote Journeys Out of the Body, which was a book about outer body experiences, and they do studies at the Monroe Institute about outer body experiences, astral projection, the Gateway Project, which is also linked to the CIA. Also, there's some declassified stuff there about us living in this hologram, and it's really crazy stuff. And Joe was actually, and I guess this is how he met Nancy. I didn't ask him, but Joe was actually asked to go to the Monroe Institute to be studied by Bob, by the DIA, I believe, the Defense Intelligence Agency. They wanted him to spend the long weekends from Thursday to Sunday in Nellysford, getting his brain measured and doing all these tests. And he did this for 14 months, and he said he found some significant studies that showed that out of body actually does work. But before we get into that, let's talk about meeting Joe. We go to his place, beautiful little town, and he invites us into his home. What are your first thoughts?
Yeah, I'd read a lot about him. He's kind of like this mythical creature at the top of the remote viewing chain, and there he was, just sitting there.
Yeah.
And from what I had understood is that he's hard to pin down for an interview.
Yeah, he refused so many interviews.
Yeah.
It's funny, when we walked in, he turns to Nancy, a Scooter, and he goes, see, I had a good feeling about these guys. That made me feel so good when he said that.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, we're just two guys. I got tattoos and stuff.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And
we're barging in with these cameras.
with
and
these
stuff.
not even professional. Like, we just got our little, dinky DSLRs and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not some big TV thing. And yeah, he had a good feeling about us, and we really got along.
Yeah, and they were super welcoming, and happy to basically let us do whatever we wanted.
Yeah.
He showed us all around his house. So welcoming. He had boxes filled with cassettes of his live appearances where he did remote viewing
Over
live.
60 live appearances on TV, 60 live remote viewing sessions on TV, which is more than you can say for anyone else in the remote viewing space.
And I saw that. I mean, I was just like, man, these need to be out there. Like, why does he have them here in this box? Like, I would love to digitize those and get those out. Because
I'm working on that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm working on that. I want him to get somebody to do it for him.
Yeah.
But because he did a TV show in Japan, which he touched on, where they had to find 24 missing people. This is so fucking wild, honestly. They had to find 24 missing people, and he ended up finding 12. That's
insane. Insane.
We're talking double blind. Yeah. He has no idea what he's looking for. He knows the person.
Yeah.
He describes the person. It's so insane that, like, he's like, yeah, did you guys know he was Korean? They're like, huh? They went to double check. Yeah, he was adopted by a Korean family. He now lives in Korea. This is outside of Japan. He's in this building, on this floor, in this room.
Yeah.
Show up with the cameras. They show up with the camera. There he is. The brother's crying, and they're all like, oh my God. Like, that is crazy.
And that's actually a verified thing.
It's verified.
Person.
And they had skeptics on the show.
Trying to figure out
trying to disprove him actively.
Yeah.
Like, after the show, even going behind there looking like this is a trick, He knows something. How does he know anything about a missing person?
Right.
The missing person was brought to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that was one of the most so he showed us some of those sample sessions, and when I saw him I was like, so where is this your final like debrief?
I was confused as well.
Because it was so like matter of fact. Here's the height, the name,
street
sketches,
names,
these
the
maps
subway maps
that he drew. And he's like, no, this is my session. And you compare it to the sessions we do where it's like different stages.
Yeah, we're like
scribbles.
edgy, scratchy, smells warm.
Yeah.
Like all these.
But he was like, no, this person is 5'9". Their age range is between like
57, 58.
Yeah.
No margin of error.
No like scratches off or like side notes. It's all just like written there. So that was surprising to me. And it told me like, okay, this person has
whole other game
and a whole other process too, which I have never been shown yet. And that got me so excited.
Dude, it got me excited, but at the same time, it's like seeing someone who's super talented in a field that you want to pursue, and it kind of discourages you.
That too, yeah.
Where I'm like, well, I'm going to fucking give up. This guy's way too good. And
but you're like, well, he's got a different technique. Maybe if I learn that, I get better.
That's right.
That's what I thought.
And I'm interested to figure out what that technique is in time.
I hope it's not just feel it. And just write what comes to mind. I hope there's more to it than that. There probably is.
Here's the thing. Because I think speaking with Ed, I have to also speaking with Joe, I have to also speak about Dr. Ed May.
Okay.
Who is still the chief, researcher and physicist and scientist behind remote viewing, still to this day, still studying.
And he's
83
monitor,
now.
Right?
He was the senior scientist at SRI.
Wow. Yep.
So he was up there. They had to. The scrutiny that they had to that they had to build to really study this, because they are, you have to understand, like, Joe can have his stories and Ed Dames can have his stories, but this is a physicist.
Yeah.
This is someone who was hired to study it and to be skeptical, to be the most skeptical, and to create the protocol that needed to be put in place in order to measure this properly, statistically, scientifically. And we're talking everything from numbers, from them measuring their brain waves, to everything, to remote viewing in submarines. Like, they tested it to no extent. Like, there's so much work on this stuff. Joe even jokes about there's more studies on this than there is about aspirin, which I thought was interesting. And so they put together, Ed was tasked to put together. First of all, they had to let's start with the remote viewers. They reached out to 600. This is from Ed. They reached out to 600 people, and these weren't random people. So these were like Mensa level, some of them, so geniuses. Other were in CIA intelligence, and so really smart people. Yeah, exactly. Autistic even. They would go there. So they made a group, and out of those 600, Ed said there's only 1% that has notable psychic ability.
Interesting.
And so they, I think, whittled it down to like 10. But even now, if you speak to Joe and if you speak to Ed May, they'll tell you there's like 4 or 5 that are really good.
Right, Joe was saying that.
Yeah. And you want to know the interesting thing that you didn't hear? Because you're like, okay, what do they have in common? Because they looked for all the commonalities.
Oh, sure.
The only commonality, very significant, they all had synesthesia.
Oh, wow.
Each one of them.
Did Joe have?
I believe
we
so.
Talk about that?
We didn't talk about it, but
Damn,
this is what Ed May said. They all do.
Wow.
And not even like a light form of synesthesia, like straight up hearing colors and seeing sounds and shit like that.
Wow.
So this is, so I'm like, well, that's something that you guys can look for now. He's like, absolutely. He's like, that is, it's not something they planned out, and it's just something that happened that way.
I have a close friend in the memory world who has a very significant synesthesia. I should ask her if she has any.
Ooh. That would be.
Because I was talking about in memory how I have a trained synesthesia essentially for
That's
like
true.
numbers and things like that, but it's not natural. But for this memory athlete, she has it. She's always had it,
So there's another portion of this that might be tough, because does she sort of have this automatic memory?
She is amazing. One of the best at, say, words and names and others, but those are so natural for her. Sometimes when you ask her, like, what's your technique? And you hear her talk about it, and it's kind of what I do, but on another level where it's
automatic.
Like, you're not really doing anything. You're just being you. And
It's
frustrating, right?
Ed had mentioned that those make terrible remote viewers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He had this guy who is like the best memory guy. He did like 30,000 digits of pi, 35,000 digits. You might know him.
Is it Daniel Tammet?
I could be.
Because I reached out to him recently because I wanted to talk to him physics stuff, and that was the first name he threw at me. And I know a lot about Daniel Tammet. He's a bit of a con artist. I wonder if that's him. I know he memorized a lot of digits to that extent. So maybe that's
this
him.
person was autistic or on the spectrum.
That's the guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Asperger's, right?
Ed. Ed.
You tested him?
Yep.
Ooh.
And they said no good.
The thing is, there's some stuff about him. Whether he was, I don't think there's any argument over whether he was on the spectrum or not, but whether he was using memory techniques or having a natural ability was largely in question. He's mentioned at the end of Moonwalking with Einstein, if you want to go back and reread.
Yeah. So the problem that he found with memory athletes, so I don't think he knows the difference between a memory athlete and someone who has like photographic memory.
Okay.
Because I do think that's like a condition you have, like when you're on the spectrum and you have this sort of photographic memory.
Yeah.
But most people don't know that memory athletes are just average people who practice. But what they found is that they're very front-loaded. The overlays are insane with people with like this automatic memory, because they will recall so many things
I see.
And so as soon as you feel something, or it maps to something,
right?
it jumps on this neural pathway and you get an image. And so you become immensely front loaded.
Got it. Okay.
And that was the
so
problem.
It's hard
there.
to kind of block out that.
Right. Which is not what
rational mind.
you have. And that's what I was trying to explain to Ed, but I don't think he really understood. I think for him, that's a whole, no, memory people are bad at it, but I don't think most people understand, what memory athletes are, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he doesn't understand, and,
Yeah. I'll have to ask him more.
Yeah, so that was, we talked to Joe about all this. He mentions all sorts of rigorous training and military guy, man. These guys, they get up at 4 a.m. and they're like, working for 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all for, progress and being studied and some
stress. Right? He talked about a lot about the stress of that job. Some of the tasks they have to do just weighed so heavily on them.
Yeah, some of them quit. A lot of them quit. Most of them quit.
Yeah.
They couldn't handle the stress. I mean, the stress, and what we mean by stress isn't just remote viewing under pressure. It's a lot of times being taped, being videoed, being monitored by DOD, by DIA, by all these 3-letter agencies that you're speaking about your career, your job safety, and the fear of missing a target or not being accurate, is linked directly into the fear of losing your job.
Yeah.
So it must be definitely a high stress environment.
And all while doing something that is ridiculed.
Yeah.
And you have that pressure, right? You can't kind of talk about it, or you don't want to talk about it because you'll be laughed at.
Yep.
Yeah, that's tough.
I asked Ed May in the interview, I was like, is this, I had to ask, is this real?
Mm-hmm.
What do you, and he says to me, he's like, let's say you're a chef and you have, I love physicists, by the way, because they fucking dumb it down for me. They're so smart. They're like, oh, here's your reading level. He goes, let's say you're a chef and you're opening this restaurant. You have 19 seats. And first night you open the restaurant, it's a great success. 19 people. Okay. Great. Second night, 17 of those 19 people return. Is that a success?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gold star.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there are 19 of these intelligence agencies in the United States.
Okay.
17 of them came back.
Oh, yeah.
Time and time again.
Yeah.
They came back up to close to 500 times total with individual missions, we'll say.
He wanted that delicious dessert again.
He has a graph of all the agencies, how many times they came back each.
Cool.
And now 99% of all of these missions are still classified.
Okay.
But he showed me the graph, which is interesting. And the DIA came back 172 times for individual missions, not including the times they came back for the same missions. They loved their work, what they were doing. Huh. And part of that was, I believe it was like finding drugs coming off boats. And the remote viewers were just really good at it. And I guess, again, it speaks to like the entropy of like maybe the product that was on board or something. And they could clearly see it. So they came back 172 times because they were like, yep, this works. And they loved it.
And it's cheap.
Yeah.
Right?
Super cheap.
You need paper and a pen. That's
CIA, like once or twice. FBI once or twice. But then, you had all these other agencies so many times.
Very interesting.
All right, let's get back to Joe a bit. Joe, takes us through his home. Lots of, you look through his home, lots of like Asian inspiration. He spent a lot of times overseas, in working in Japan. I believe in like Vietnam also. And so heavily inspired by like Buddhist and Asian culture. We got to look at his bookshelf. We got to look at all this stuff, which is really cool. Do you recall any of the remote viewing sessions that he had or like stories he had related to remote viewing?
Yeah, I mean, the big one was, and this was after we were talking for like an hour and a half already, and he's telling me normal stories that were very believable. And then, at this point I'm like, I'm in, I trust this guy. I have a good feeling. Like, I can't imagine this guy's making any of this up, or that he's not able to do what he's talking about. And then he loads us with this remote viewing session he did where he viewed Mars a million
years
BC.
ago. Yeah.
And, it's, you think, okay, well, I just believed everything he said, so I probably have to believe this too.
Yeah.
And you talk about on your other podcast a little bit if you want to say
Yeah.
what you
I
saw.
also, there is a video, or there will be a video out on it that I'm making individually on
nice.
this channel.
It
So I don't know if,
deserves
yeah, but this is it here, the Mars exploration.
Oh, yeah.
And what's interesting about this is, like Nelson mentioned, he showed us sessions that were highly accurate. Actually, before we get into this one, let's talk about the session where he followed the agent.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He was tasked to find the location of an agent
Right.
for one of these intelligence agencies, and the agent would be at 3 different locations. And I mean, it is okay. Maybe let's back even further. When Joe was entered into this project, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
He had to do a test right off the bat.
Oh, right.
5 remote viewing sessions. He scored a 1 out of 4. That's how they measure it. They have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 being nothing, 3 being maybe, 2 being okay.
Pretty close.
Pretty close, like you're in the vicinity. 1 being dead on.
Yeah.
And so most of the times you would find it between the 2 and 4 range. Joe scored 4 number 1s. They'd never seen it to this day, had never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
And you have to understand what that means is that these physicists are testing, these scientists are testing Joe, and they make no distinction between what Joe is seeing and what the target is.
Right.
That is
That's
the number 1.
Yeah.
It is not, oh yeah, it's kind of, it is 1 for 1.
Yeah.
That is remarkable. After Joe did that, he tanked.
Yeah, he had like, what,
20
to 30
sessions.
bad sessions?
That were just terrible. He was even beaten up on himself and everything else until he had this other session where he got this headache and this loud sound, and then it was an alarm, and he got right back into it. So it's something about confidence, too, that speaks in. He wrote a whole paper about that. But then they had that. And to jump back to Ed during this time, Ed was tasked, I think, with other people in creating a team of scientists who would study, who would actively try and disprove this. There were a dozen of them. And these are people, highest researchers in their field, in physics and all this, right? Yep. Just really, really smart people who had to come up with a protocol. And that protocol was like, hey, you have to do this under these conditions or else we can't measure it. And they did that, and they continued studying it for 2 decades because it was so riveting. He even had people come in and try and disprove it, and he said, hey, if you can disprove it, the guy, one guy, like one of the smartest geniuses that this guy knows, like a Nobel winner or whatever, he goes, I think this is all bullshit. And he's like, I know. He's like, all right, I'm going to study this. I'm going to look into it for like a year. And if, and then Ed May says, if you convince these other 12 people that this is bullshit, I will retire happily and I will work for you. We will study whatever you're working. And he goes, okay. And he's like, no, that's not all. If you work with these 12 people for the next year and find that there's something to this, you got to work on this project. And he's like, deal. To this day.
Yeah.
The guy works on this project.
Oh, he does? Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So really interesting little tidbit of information. But it just shows you the absolute rigor that this has to be emphasized. This isn't up in the air. This isn't us sitting at our desk doing a little session. This is like closed room, double blind. We're going to look hard and long at these sessions.
Yeah.
And they even had a structure for what was really interesting. They called it a fuzzy set and a clear set.
Oh, okay.
And so a clear set would be if you were to name all the countries that had 1 million or more people, all the cities that had 1 million or more people, you could name those. Mm-hmm. But then you're excluding all the ones that might be 1 short.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be clear set if they were 1 short. And so there has to be a way of measuring that too. Yeah. That's what they call a fuzzy set.
Fuzzy set, okay.
And so they had to figure out a way of measuring the intangible or measuring, the subjective. And the way they did that was the monitor would then ask the remote viewer and look at the drawing, let's say, and he would say, what portion of the drawing is a building?
Okay.
What percentage of the drawing is a building? and how accurate is this to a building. So if it was this with windows, it might be 80%.
Okay.
But if it was just this, it's like 20, 30%.
Okay.
Right? So they would be tasked, the monitor would have to be tasked on describing everything and going through it and being like, is this?
That's a lot more rigorous than I would imagine. Yeah.
Exactly. And then they would have a number. 70% it was this. And then they would measure that up against the target itself.
Okay.
And even like what portion of the paper does it occupy and like things like that.
Cool.
So very rigorous and very very much they wanted to actively disprove it. That was their job so that they could continue their research, and you don't want to be a scientist, a physicist pretending.
Right.
What the fuck is that?
Yeah.
For 20 years?
Right.
Can you imagine having a doctorate at Harvard or whatever, winning a Nobel Prize or whatever it is, and just like turning a blind eye and being biased? Like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah. I mean, on one level, I can understand maybe in academia, you've studied something for so long, it's going to be hard to shift those people, to shift your worldview. You might stand by your results.
Yeah, but these are people who were skeptic. They had to be skeptic, and they had to have an open mind. So those are the two factors that they had to have.
But I was going to say, ultimately, for me, the reason I studied physics was because I wanted definite answers about the world in a very scientific way. So as a physicist, I feel like that's what you're after is the right answer. And, the evidence and the way you study it is going to be what you base those.
But somebody who's got a degree in, let's say, psychology, it could be argued that the last thing they want to do is go into parapsychology because it feels, it sounds a little,
it's got the giggle factor.
But it's there. I think one person who I'd have to go back in the interview, but somebody who studied this parapsychology the most was actually like the head of the Psychology Institute in England or whatever it was, and so like very credible people in psychology world studying parapsychology because there is something there. Okay, so we get through all this. It's clear as day that that Joe McMoneagle has absolute talent and a gift. He is then asked to follow these three agents and describe their whereabouts, and the agent. The descriptors and the drawings are fucking crazy accurate. The first one, he's seeing this. He doesn't even know how to describe it because it's so complex, and it happens to be what do you call it? A collider or an accelerator?
Accelerator,
particle accelerator. And so he just literally says particle accelerator
because it was so complicated.
Yeah, that's how accurate this guy is. Secondly, says he's in a field somewhere. There's a lot of hills, and there's wind turbines in some type of valley. And the third one, he's in a T-shaped building at the very top floor with his feet up on the desk, and we'll call it the A building, he says. And so they get the first result back. He was indeed in the Stanford science vicinity in a particle accelerator, in the room of a particle accelerator. So dead fucking on. Second one, and we have a session. Second one, he was in fact in the middle of a field, a bunch of wind turbines in Northern California, Southern California, or one of those. And the third, he was in a T-shaped building at the top floor with his feet on the desk, and this building was called the A building. And this is fucking insane to me.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do, which he said again, was like the production of energy, which makes it come through stronger. Again, that entropy. So like the windmills and the generator. And so we see the evidence of that. We see I've spoken to Ed, who confirms this, Ed May, and we see his sessions. So we know that this is evidence.
Yeah.
This is credible evidence. Now he talks about Mars.
Right.
That's where we get fucked up.
Yeah. And he was the first to say that you can't verify it, and he hates those targets. I like that about Joe, that he said that. He doesn't like to do those, where Ed, that's all he did.
That's all he does. He's like, where's the Holy Grail?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to find it.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, that he felt that way. But yeah, it basically he's talking about how he was seeing these pyramids. Again, he's double blind. He doesn't know that he's seeing Mars a million years ago. Pyramids with these 10-foot tall beings.
Who look like us.
Look like us. They're inside the pyramids, preparing for something, right? To leave or something like
They're
that.
in a hibernation chamber, is what he called it, so that they can sort of weather out. It's like almost like shelter you from the storm.
Yeah.
And waiting on someone to return.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like biding their time because their planet is dying.
Yeah,
That is like
right,
the feeling you got. He even said the sun looked weird.
Yeah, right.
And then the monitor, who was possibly Ed at this point, was like, "Don't." Oh no, it was Bob Monroe. It was Bob Monroe, because Bob Monroe was the Department of Defense, DoD, that had a target.
Yeah.
That brought it to Bob Monroe, folded it, put it in his pocket. Bob Monroe did not see this, and Ed was in one of these pods getting rest after one of these long, sessions that he was doing, like a remote viewing, in astral projection, all this. And then, so he's in this state of, here or there. And then he, sees the target, and it's, again, this is double blind. So Bob doesn't know, Ed doesn't know what the target is, or Bob doesn't know and Joe doesn't know.
Right.
And all he's given is geographical coordinates. Now, one would assume that geographical coordinates would be on Earth. And I'm sure that's what he didn't assume otherwise.
Right.
There's no reason for him to assume otherwise. He has this, he's given the coordinates. There's a set of coordinates, maybe 5 or 6. And one at a time he's asked to describe. And I have the transcript here, which I pulled off the CIA website, which are declassified right now. What's really crazy is that it's really hard to find things on that website.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I've never
Everything's
explored. Oh.
And this is what Joe said. Joe said they would. He's like, "Oh, you want all the information? Perfect." And they'd scramble all the papers and be like, "Yeah, it's disseminated now, but good luck
You figure it
fucking
out.
putting it
Yeah.
together." And so it says here: method of site acquisition, sealed envelope coupled with geographic coordinates.
Okay.
The sealed envelope was given to the subject immediately prior to the interview. The envelope was not opened until after the interview. In the envelope was a 3x5 card with the following information: the planet Mars, time of interest approximately 1 million years BC. Selected geographic coordinates provided by the parties requesting the information were verbally given to the subject during the interview.
This is crazy that's like, this is a real
This is the real session.
session.
Yeah, given by Bob Monroe. And it doesn't say who. So when I read this online, which, I mean, you find this online, you're like, this is really interesting, and some TikTok video talking about it, but then there's no way of knowing who did this session. And I think Joe mentioned it in his book, and I was like, wait, that's Joe? And it just gave more credence to it in my mind. And so, we'll go watch that video if it's up about that. But he explains, these hibernation chambers and these beings and the sun being weird and these giant pyramids.
Yeah.
He's saying you could fit 3 of the Giza pyramids inside.
Right. Massive ones.
Which is so crazy. And he kept wondering, he's like, is this new discovery? He kept saying.
Yeah. He
like
couldn't understand how this was actually being.
Yeah.
Where was this on Earth?
And it's funny because at the end of this session too, it talks about them getting into a giant metallic ship, going to another place which has different vegetation and all of this, and you assume it's Earth, which is wild. Joe doesn't talk about that in our interview. He kind of because I think his memory's a little hazy on it. He recalled what he could, but it was just so fascinating to hear that, because once he saw this, he was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
Like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
And his drawings and everything. Like, I mean,
The drawings are
again,
so detailed.
This could have been a soccer field.
Right.
It
Could have been anything.
and for him to be like, the sun looks weird. Oh, there's like these beings, and we're talking about Mars, dude. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
And then you see I don't know how, I didn't quite understand this, the photos he showed us of actual Mars surface where there was some object that looked like a pyramid.
Yeah.
Was that, so he does this session and then they.
I'll go grab them if you want to keep talking.
Yeah. So basically there's, these are actual, if you all remember, I think it was in the early 2000s, there was this famous face on Mars photo, and it looked like somebody's face on the surface, right? And then I think later on, NASA gave other pictures that said, hey, it's not actually a face. If you look at it at this angle, it looks nothing like it. It was just the way it was taken. But
Yeah, they
there's
did have different angles.
But there was some question about whether that was doctored or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His book, by the way, Stargate Chronicles: Memoirs of a Psychic Spy. Highly encourage you to check it out, or on Audible. So
my question was: were these photos part of the session? Like,
No.
was the target that he was given tied to that photo, or not necessarily? They found that after
him being a spy,
yeah,
took these coordinates and went straight to NASA
okay,
and said, "I want these photos of Mars with these coordinates."
okay.
And he was given those
So
photos.
the coordinates are there.
This is
Oh,
what
yeah,
he
that's
remote
wild.
viewed.
Yeah, okay.
So
he was remote viewing the location and place that they told him, but there's actual photos of that place.
yes. So these are.
And when are these from? Like 2004 or something?
No, this was way earlier, actually.
Well, no, these satellite images.
Oh, the satellite images. Good question.
I feel like they're fairly recent. I mean, in the last like,
No,
20 years.
maybe I'd have to look into it. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't want to say anything because I don't know. So this is like his drawings.
Yep.
Which, again, you look at that and he's.
Yeah. Well, these are a bit upside down. I wonder why he collated them. It's like.
This is for his book.
Oh, okay. He gave us those copies.
Yeah.
He could have given us like a photocopy.
I know.
And then the beings here, like he's drawing for size, an
Yeah.
actual human versus this other 10-foot tall being.
Look at these structures.
Yeah.
He said this was a collapsed building.
Mm.
And you look at here, there's like even like canals.
Yeah.
And
right.
this lengthy structure here.
Yeah.
And more structures here. This is kind of what he was seeing here.
Yeah.
And this. If you look at this and this. Look at those two.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. And on that one pyramid photo, the shadow is.
Yeah, we'll look at that. We'll
Absurdly
look at that one
long.
next. I think, which is this one here, which is that. But then we have this one, this notable one, which is very notable because you can see that there is this giant crater, and beside it is this mountain, which arguably could be a pyramid. He asked the NASA guy, he's like, anything. First of all, he's like, how deep is that crater by the shadow? And he says about 3,000 feet.
Oh, right. You can see the shadow of that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so by measuring that 3,000 feet and now looking at the shadow, which goes off page, by the way, of this other pyramid, which is like, could measure like up to 2 inches, you have to assume this is a massive structure.
Massive structure.
He even asked, he's like, how big is that? And the guy goes, really big. And then Ed, Joe, I keep saying Ed, I get mixed up. Joe says, that's an impact crater. Anything that would have impacted that would have destroyed any structure beside it.
True. Yeah.
And so he goes, what is it? And the guy at NASA goes, it must have grown. And that was his answer.
Built.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously the faces of Mars. Where's that one? Is that the one?
That's this one here. Yeah, the top here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got that mask-looking thing with the shadow across it.
So really, really cool stuff. Here, by the way, is he was. So I was shown the photograph of an individual and told that he's currently working on a technical site somewhere in the continental United States. I was asked to describe what he was working on. So this is subsequent to visualizing the agent's location.
Yep.
And now they're like, well, what is the agent working on? And this is, I mean, have a look at it for yourself, dude.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah. And I remember looking at this and being. One of the things about Joe is like he's an artist.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So his sketches are so detailed.
Mm.
Like they make our sketches look like
Yeah, like
We
we're
have-
children.
like we have mental.
Yeah, absolutely.
problems.
100%.
But I just like, how do you come? I don't know how you get to a place where you can draw such specifics.
And like you said, don't scribble anything out. And there's no like question mark maybe.
No,
It's
no
like-
racing. It's
yeah.
just first go.
And if you look at some of the things he has here, like he has this beam going out, and he says a wavefront emitter. Literally a beam
very
with a
specific.
wavefront emitter, sensitive to more specific elements of wavefront effects, and then measurements, shock waves. It measures shock waves, velocities, heat, and that type of thing. So it's this big cone that is like an emitter, and it's made to measure things, and that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's exactly what it was. Here's some kind of gun.
Yeah.
And this is what it... Like, I mean, come on, man.
But
What are you doing
I
here?
haven't, out of all the remote viewing stuff I've read and seen, I've never seen anything like his.
Yeah.
So I think he is a special case.
I do.
Um,
Like you said, there's like 4 or 5 of them there like
Yeah.
this that are at this level.
yeah. But I don't think that means that nobody else can do it. I think we all...
That's true.
Because what did he say? He said he's like right 80% of the time. Is that what he said? What,
Yeah, 80% accurate. And I think what he meant by that was 80, like when he's right, he's
okay.
80% accurate.
His information is like
Yeah.
80% there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what Ed May said, the chief scientist, he said that, because he showed me 2 sessions, one from Joe and one from a lady, I want to say her last name is Ford. I don't remember her first name.
Nancy Ford?
Nancy Ford.
Yeah. Okay.
She was extremely gifted as well, and showed me one of their most memorable sessions each, and they were just crazy. They had Joe sort of, what they do is really interesting. They cut these ping pong balls in half, put them on your eyes,
Okay.
and shine a bright red light.
Oh, yes. I've heard about this. Yeah.
And static in your ears, like a low kind of static.
What's the name of this? There's an effect, right? It's
Yeah, I don't know what the name of it is, but I know that what he said is that eventually you just see black
okay.
and you don't hear the sound because our brains are wired to detect change. And so when something is sort of, because there's humming and buzzing all around us all the time, we kind of tune it out.
Yeah.
Same with your vision, and same with like touch and every other sense. If there's no change and it's sort of consistent, you just get used to it.
Yeah.
Once you hit that state, that's when you're kind of in between. So he would tell Joe,
In between what?
in between awake and asleep,
Okay. Yeah.
he would tell Joe, look to your left and right shoulder like this, and they would be measuring his brain activity, and his brain activity, it would show that he's doing this, but in reality he's doing this, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, all right, got it, he's doing this. And they said, Joe, we want you to get out of your body, go into the next room. In the next room, we put an envelope on the wall. I want you to open that envelope, look in the envelope, and just draw what you see. And he's like, all right. And he goes, for the life of me, I can't find the envelope. It's like, so instead, kind of like Dorothy, click my heels, and I want to be where the photographer was when he took this photo. And he ends up doing that and describing an image, and it is 1 for 1. It is this field. He even writes the Rockies, which it was in, a little barn or a house, a path, trees and mountains in the back, and it is like 1 for 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was the Rockies?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. He said Rockies or Alps,
Okay.
but it was Rockies. So through a different method, but seeing this, but just again seeing that, and then I was like, how many of these sessions are this accurate with these specific people? And he said 20%.
Interesting.
Which is insane when you think about it.
Yeah.
1 in 5.
Yeah. Well, with that amount of accuracy.
5 in 20 that it's a dead-on match.
Yeah.
Is worthy of looking into
For sure. Yeah.
because the p-value of that must be insane. He could have drawn anything.
Yeah.
And he was that accurate. And again, it wasn't like he didn't draw a big barn, a couple trees around and mountains in the background. It was literally to scale, when they're right, they're right.
Yeah.
They're like dead on.
Crazy.
Really, really intriguing stuff for sure. I do want to, how are we going to know? All right. We still got a bit more time.
Okay.
What we're going to do is I do want to save a story for the Patreon.
Yeah. I know the story.
You know the story I'm talking about?
For sure.
All right. We can get into that. It involves
Juicy.
It involves aliens
Yeah.
and it involves UFOs, and it has to do with remote viewing. And we can talk about all that stuff in the Patreon. But I think we're gonna call it here for our first episode of Debriefed. Dude, so honored to have you on. Honored to be a part of this journey with you.
It was an awesome. I'm so glad that I was on the Bob and mentioned remote viewing almost as a joke in passing, because I thought you'd be interested, but I didn't realize it would lead to this rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I think we're not done with this.
No, it's an ongoing quest. I think we're at a high, and we're still trying to explore.
Yeah, definitely check out his video that he's got coming up, or it's out already, about remote viewing and his experience and everything. I look forward to seeing it and hearing your thoughts as someone who's, studied physics, who's just, grounded. It's just
I'm extremely skeptical of everything. So I'll let you know. So
how about the time to mention that at the end of the podcast?
Yeah, right. I should have started with that. But
I mean, I think they assume that they're not here if they're skeptical. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, thanks for having me on the show. And
thanks for being here,
part of the
Nelson. Guys, don't forget to subscribe. Check out our Patreon. The Patreon, I'm putting a lot of stuff out there. I've got already, I think, in the moment, probably a dozen videos. And you get access to the secret Discord as well, where we talk all about these things and share, inside information, behind the scenes stuff. So I do appreciate you guys hanging out, and we'll see you on the next Debriefed. Peace.